Hello again. Okay, so I am a little bit more awake today, and I've been wanting to do this vlog on Galatians 4. Some of the things that, as I've been learning them, sometimes they seem to contradict some of the things that I have known in the New Testament. So one of those passages is in Galatians when it comes to the holidays and keeping the feasts of the Lord and keeping Sabbath. So I wanted to just talk about this one a little bit because this was one of the verses that popped up in my head right away when I was starting to consider what I felt like Genesis 1:14 was saying and what the other verses were saying in the Old Testament about, if we join ourselves with Israel, then we have the same requirements, the same instructions that they have, because we're joining their God, and this is what their God has asked people to do. So anyway, Galatians 4, I'm just going to read the couple verses here. Galatians 4, 8 through 11, I believe. So it says, "In the past, when you did not know God, you served as slaves, beings which in reality are non-gods. But now that you do know God, and more than that, you are known by God. So how is it that you turn back again to those weak and miserable elemental spirits? Do you want to enslave yourself to them once more? You observe special days, months, seasons, and years. I fear that my work among you has been wasted." Okay. So off the top, it just seems like, okay, that's what Paul's saying. He's saying, why are you going back, Galatians? Why are you, those that are saved, why are you going back to these special holidays and occasions that are in the Old Testament? Don't you know that you have been saved from those things, that Jesus came, and no longer do you need to subject yourself to these do this, don't do this, or the holidays or special days. Okay, that's where my brain has always gone when I've read those verses. So let me back up a little bit. Galatians was written to not necessarily Hebrew people. They were written to people that had been Gentiles that had been a part of cities and religions that had some really crazy ideas. They had their own kind of gods. They had their own special days. They had their own instructions about what their God requires of them. So when we first start reading it, it says, "In the past, when you did not know God, you served as slaves, beings which in reality are non-gods." Okay, so first of all, let's stop with that verse. This could not be talking to the Hebrew people. It could not be talking to Jewish people because it says, "You served as slaves, beings which in reality are non-gods." Okay, so right there we know they're not talking about the Jewish people, because Paul wouldn't be saying you served non-gods as if Jehovah was not a god. Okay, so this is really, the second kind of reality that this is not talking to Jewish people. The first one is that this book was written to Gentile believers that had already been involved in a lot of cult activity and God worship. Okay, so the next verse is, "But now you do know God, and more than that, you are known by God. So how is it that you turn back again to those weak and miserable elemental spirits?" Okay, so if this is Paul, what I used to think is that the weak and miserable elemental spirits comes in the next verse, which says you observe special days, because it goes on. Let me just read that verse again. "But now you do know God, and more than that, you are known by God. So how is it that you turn back again to those weak and miserable elemental spirits? Do you want to enslave yourself to them once more?" There's no way that Paul, who was a Jewish believer would ever say that you're being enslaved by something that God had said to them in the Old Testament. It was not a weak thing. He calls this thing that they're enslaving themselves to, these special days and months and seasons, it being enslaved to something that was weak and miserable. There is not a chance in the world, when you read other things that Paul says, that he would have called something that Jehovah, that God would have said to do, as something weak, miserable, or being enslaved to. It was a joy to them to follow these things. It wasn't an enslavement. So now we see that that could not have been Paul's perspective on this. And then the last verse here, just verse 10, you observe special days, months, seasons, and years. These are not, this verse, there's no way that it's talking about biblical days, but false God days that Gentile people in these, Ephesus and Philippi and Galatia, where they were living, these were to Gentiles that Paul was saying, come out from those weak, miserable, non-God days that you set aside, because they're not about God. He was not talking about the feast or the holy days or the Sabbaths of his historical walk with God. So there's just one. That was one of the Galatians ones that always kind of threw me. But after being able to look at it with being a little bit more, considering the whole picture and what it was that Paul would have been, who he was talking to, why he was saying what he was saying, there are too many pieces of information in here that point to the fact that Paul was not talking about Sabbaths. He was not talking about feast days. He was talking about false gods and those that were in Galatia and what they were serving. So that's Galatians. I know there's some that, there's one in the book of Acts that I want to do next. There's some in Romans, so I'll be getting to those too. Okay, signing off for now.